Hey guys, thank you for joining us today for the MICA Center for Student Engagement and Closest to Home 3D Modeling livestream. My name is Samantha Vassor. I'm the co-founder of Closest to Home. ClosestToHome.com and our Closest to Home on IG is an online and social media platform for intersectional, Black, Indigenous, and people of color identities interested in 3D digital art and game art. As part of our initiative, Closest to Home has been filling in the gap created by the lack of digital resources for BIPOC and the lack of 3D models representative of our narratives and cultures in open source 3D libraries. The website consists of an interactive game and a commenting section that prompts online discussion, as well as a render page links to articles, readings, documentaries, etc., catered towards learning more about the experiences and cultures the regional objects represent. Our Instagram has consisted of digital art skill shares and collaborations, 3D modeling live streams, an open source 3D object library, and resource lists, all catered towards creating accessibility for digital art for BIPOC. Closest to Home was created to share our narratives as women of color and to bring more awareness to the experiences of other marginalized people. Through this project, we are recording culturally specific objects as points of empathy, normalizing their definitions and connotations beyond the label of cultural object. Through Closest to Home, we hope to further grow our network of digital artists interested in this accessibility of narratives. We are now expanding into doing online tutorials and workshops, such as this one, and we can't wait to do more in the future. To reach out to us, DM us on IG at Closest to Home, or comment below to let us know what kind of videos or resources you'd like to see more of. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Grace. I'm the second half of Closest at Home, and today I'll be leading the 3D modeling part of this workshop. We're going to be working completely in Blender, which is a free 3D modeling software if you weren't aware already. But this is our second live stream, so please keep that in mind. If I seem a little awkward, I'm gonna try my best. Today we're modeling a quilt submitted by Faith. Faith submitted these images of her quilts made by her late grandmother. And I'm gonna read a quick description of these quilts from Faith. My grandma loved making quilts and made one for all of us being my cousins, aunts, and uncles. This one is actually mine, but my mom and I have a couple around the house. I sometimes wish I asked her to teach me how to make them. My cousin once made a joke that sometimes her quilts are the OG weighted blanket, cause when we use them, we be knocked out. I wasn't that close with my grandma, but knowing that she made these quilts for us makes me feel closer to her. So we really loved this submission from Faith because we felt that the story and narrative behind it really aligned with Close Isn't Home's mission that Sam mentioned earlier. However, because we don't have the same exact patterns or the images of them, we are going to try to focus more on how to model and simulate the quilt in Blender. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat and we'll try to answer them in the chat as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So what we're looking at right now is just a blank Blender project. I deleted the default cube, light, and camera, and we are just working with something that's completely empty. So just a few things I want to know even before we get started with modeling is that we have a mouse that shows which button I'm clicking on and also shows what keys I'm pressing. So if you want to follow along with hotkeys, that's a really good way of finding out. And finally, another thing to add is if you go to preferences, we're going to add the Node Wrangler add-on. This will be really helpful when we are going to texture. So we're gonna actually start with a plane. I just found that this was the easiest way for me, but you could start with a cube essentially. So Shift A, plane. We're starting with a plane or a cube because I'm basing the structure kind of off of quilt squares that Faith's quilt is made of, but also many other quilts are made of. It's kind of like a general structure for many quilts. But what we're gonna do with the plane is kind of create a 2D layout of pieces, kind of like how you would with sewing, and then make sew lines, and then make it thicker and then simulate it. From here, what we're going to do is actually extrude these edges. So we're gonna go EY.4 because we're going up the y-axis, so we're gonna lock it into that. And then here we're gonna go EX.4. Here we'll do a nice EY-0.4, and then finally for here we'll do EX-0.4. So there we have our edges. After we extruded those edges of the border, we are going to kind of start onto the more tedious part, I would say. But before that, we're gonna actually extrude one more time, and I'm actually gonna make this a little thicker, so like 0.5. And this is only going to be on the top and the bottom. From here, we're going to actually make different parts. So we're going to make the pieces of the patchwork essentially. So I'm going to do it with a loop cut. I'm kind of guesstimating. Honestly, the size here doesn't matter as much. But if you want to get technical with it, you could definitely get technical with it. I'm going to actually extrude this probably like to 0.9. Yeah, and then I'm going to click on the faces that I don't want. So essentially these. Once I get there, I'm going to go back in, select all, and subdivide. And I'm going to bring this to 20 for now, but we can definitely go higher than that in the future. Let's see, maybe like 25 seems pretty good. And if you want, you could even make loop cuts and cut down these edges as well, but for now I'm just gonna do this and this. I actually made the mistake of not deleting the edges that connect the corners, so make sure you do that. And afterwards I'm going to select all the faces, or all the edges, I'm gonna say faces, and extrude it to 0.3. This thickness is also completely up to you and something that you can change later as well, but this is what I'm gonna just settle on for now. From here, I'm actually gonna create some loop cuts. And we're going to create one, and then we're going to create this one as well. So in total, we'll be making 4. Okay, so I just finished the loop cuts, and what we're gonna do with the loop cuts now are actually we're going to bridge them. And when we bridge them, that will become our sewing lines essentially. So we're just gonna go in and select them. So something I like to do is just select one, and then if you go to the other side and press Control, it'll select from that first initial edge you chose to the last one. And I'm gonna just do these as well. So once you have your two separate edges of this middle loop cut selected, you're gonna right click and click on bridge edge loops. Once you get to that, you're gonna see a new face, but you're gonna actually delete that face by clicking only faces, and you're gonna see your sew lines. And I'm gonna just do that for the rest of them as well. Alright, so now we have our bridge loops right here and around here and right here. Again, like I said before, you can also do it along these borders as well, more similar to different types of piecework, but we're gonna just stick with this for now. So from here, if you tab out, this is kind of what it looks like. Let me turn off the x-ray. You can see the edges, and those are all sew lines. So we're gonna also have to put them all around the ends of these. So what I like to do is I like to go around down the edge. So because there's that other edge, you can just control click and go back to the top view, and I'm gonna extrude similarly like how I did before. I extruded to 0.04, and once I did, this outside edge is selected, and you're gonna delete edge. That way you're just left with that sewing, those sew lines. Now that we have our outer sewing lines done, there's a couple of things that I do want to check on / fix that I don't think that I did earlier. And one of them is changing the name, which is something you can do with double click, to something that is more appropriate, so we know what each object is in our scene. Another thing is in edit mode, we're gonna click M and just merge at distance just to see if there's any duplicates, and there's none. And then another thing we're gonna do is we're going to Command A and just apply all transformations, which is kind of zeroing out the transformations, if that makes sense. Afterwards, we're going to put this object into an array, which is kind of setting up our piecework. So when you do array, it automatically sets it up to 2, but we're gonna do 4 wide, and then we're going to do a merge and the first and last, and we're gonna apply that. We're gonna set up another array, and we're gonna go up to 5, and then we're gonna do this in the Y axis. So the X is now 0, and then the Y is now 1, and we're gonna merge the first and last just like we did before. All right, so we're gonna apply that as well. We're going to actually go back to object mode and set our origin to to geometry because before it was in the center of the first tile. Another thing we have to do is get rid of these outer sewing lines because they were needed for the internal sewing lines, so essentially right here and right here, but not the ones that go to nothing. Now we're going to start our cloth simulator, but before that I'm going to actually create a collision object. So it can just be like any random cube, and you can just change the size to what you want essentially. And I'm gonna name it like platform. Shift it back into our collection, and if you go to this tab, you're going to click on this tab right here, which is the physics tab, and just click collision. Okay, so now after we made a collision tag on our, or modifier on our cube, and I named it platform, put it in quilt, we're going to put a cloth modifier or physics onto the quilt. So if you go back into that physics tab, you can click cloth. This is something that we'll definitely have to play with, but I'm gonna go first with pressure because with a quilt it kind of like billows up usually because of batting. So we're mimicking that through pressure, and I'm gonna go with 0.6 for now, and then we can adjust it if needed. And then we're gonna go with sewing in the shape tab, and I'm gonna put the max sewing force at 1. And something I thought always really is kind of nice is to change the fabric settings. So you can change it to cotton, denim, leather, rubber, silk. Usually silk looks pretty nice, but I'm gonna try the cotton. So I played around 26 seconds or frames actually, and this is what it kind of looks like. So you see that below. So we're gonna have to make some adjustments here, but I also think we should add a subdivision modifier. I modified some of the cloth settings in the modifier, and I kind of changed some things, but it was really hard to record it because it took so long. So I'm gonna just show you my settings. So the first thing I did actually was decrease the x-axis scale to around 0.15 millimeters. So you can see that right here. And of course afterwards I did Command A to zero out the transformations. In the cloth physics, I first chose my cloth like right here and chose silk, and then I also turned on the pressure and put it at 0.2, and then I have in shape I turned on sewing and I made it at 1.2. Sewing is essentially what is telling these edges in between to act as sewing lines. And then finally I kind of decreased the gravity because I thought it felt too fast to 0.5. And if you play, it looks like something along the lines of this. So it's not exactly like a quilt. I think we could like do with more pressure, And I also think that you could also add more subdivisions to kind of enhance the sewing, but it's not breaking too much. If you want, you can also add a subdivision on top of this to make it look a little better, but I just shaded it. If you right click, I shaded smooth instead of flat, which kind of did the trick for now. If you want more dynamic flow, I would go with more subdivision in your subdivision modifier. So here, you would go here and then click subdivision surface. For me though, Blender keeps on crashing while I'm recording, so I'm gonna just keep it at this. We're going to actually start texturing, and I'm not going to do a crazy texture. I'm going to just do a pretty generic fabric texture so that you can get started. You can also include top stitches as well, but I'm going to include a whole YouTube tutorial that really goes in depth on how to do top stitches, which is really great. And another option for top stitches is actually creating this essentially in Clo3D or Marvelous Designer, which is a completely different way of approaching garments and fabrics and soft sculptures in 3D virtual spaces. For texturing, I'm going to mostly be doing alternating colors, similar to how it was in the quilt. You can open up your material file on the right, and I'm gonna create first the yellow. And what you can also do, which helps a lot, is in your viewport display, also assign a color to it. So I'm going to also assign this to yellow. I'm going to go into edit mode and start selecting the faces that I would want to be yellow. A nice trick actually is to select faces and then press Ctrl+, and that'll just add to your selection until you reach a point you would like. I'm gonna go into X-ray mode just so I can just click and drag what I would like. So once I'm gonna do the top and bottom first because it's just easier. And I'm gonna press assign. Next, we're gonna do like a blue color. is kind of, this is halfway through. I kind of cut this off because I was thinking there'd be a border, but I think it'll change once we add the pattern. And I'm going to add one more material, and I'm going to name it pattern, and I'm going to just keep it white for now. We just finished assigning our textures. If we leave, we can have a better look at it. If we leave edit mode, yes, that looks right. And then we're just gonna go more in detail. So you can either open a new tab by hovering over, and when you see that plus sign, drag, or you can go into shading, the shading tab on the top, and work through this. For yellow and blue, I'm not doing much. I'm just adding a bump map from normal map. So essentially, I'm gonna go to my textures, and I have a canvas normal map. I can provide it in the linked description below so you can download it. So after that, we're going to add a bump, and I'm gonna make this into the height, and then normal to normal. And if you look here, you see these stripes, which is something you don't want. So if we go to UV editing, we're going to do a UV unwrap. Sometimes takes a minute though. Right? And now this bump map is a lot more accurate, and you don't have to unwrap it into these shapes. There's also a light map pack, a smart UV project, and then cube, cylinder, sphere projections. But this is just easy, so I'm gonna just keep it at that. We're gonna go back into shading, and it still doesn't look completely right, and it looks almost really strange over there. So this is why we turned on Node Wrangler. We're gonna press Ctrl T, and it automatically brings up the mapping of the texture coordinate. And we're gonna scale it to 10. All right, so I did the smart one, and it looks a little better. So let's go back to shading, and we can kind of see this more canvas-like structure to it. If you feel like it's a little grainy and you don't really think it matches that well, you can change the scale right here. So if I wanted it a little bigger, you can go like 7. And if you also feel like the bump is a little high, so you see that it's like higher contrast, instead of adjusting the strength, you're going to adjust the distance. You could also kind of play around with the pencil BDSF, and then also just add other types of shaders. But today we are just doing a basic texture. So we're gonna do essentially the same thing. we're back into the UV. Remember to deselect the yellow, click the blue, and then select. So I'm gonna do another smart UV. Also, I realized that my mouse and my keyboard shortcuts are showing up, and it's because I'm on different windows, so I'll try to do it less. We're actually gonna open a new one. So I just picked this random tiled blue floral pattern, but the original had actually like teddy bears, but I just kind of went for a generic one just to show what it would look like, but feel free to use whatever you would like. I'm going to select all the pattern pieces of fabric, or so-called pieces of fabric, and then I'm going to do something really similar to before where I'm going to unwrap it. Once we have that all on our UV map, we're going to go back to shading. We're going to add an image, and instead of adding a new one here, you can just click down and click fabric floral, and then we're going to connect that to base color, and we're going to do Control T for this one as well, and we're going to do the same thing as before. Let's take a look what it looks with the final texture. The last thing I'm going to do is actually look at it in a more natural lighting. So if we go to world, and then go to background, color, environment, texture, open, and I'm gonna click PayPal. And right now this is like rendering in cycles, so I think it'll look totally different. I mean, Eevee, so it'll look very different to this. So this is kind of a view of the quilt in a different lighting and a different renderer. Like I said before, I'm going to link below some of the things I mentioned, including the top stitch video and also some other videos I feel like are relevant, and then also the normal texture, the normal canvas texture. I'll also link Close Isn't Home's Arena channel, which we have a lot of 3D resources that are available. It's always a great resource to look at or even add to. And yeah, I think we're ready for our Q&A. Thanks for joining me. I think you can hear me, and then okay, yeah, it should work now. Yeah, I think you can hear me, and then wait, I can't hear you. Hold on. It should work now. Sorry. Hmm. Wait, what? I can't hear you anymore. What is going on? I'm so sorry. Um, You guys can just do the questions like ahead about me, and then I'll try to figure it out and join it later.
Closest and home.
Um, I didn't. Yeah.
Hi.
Um,
Start talking.
can they hear us?
Yeah, they can hear you, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should work now.
Okay.
Someone said we can hear Sam, but it's really faint.
I think they should hear you both now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
sounds good. I'm so sorry about that. Some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
I guess we should just like go over the first question again.
Yeah.
So how did Closest at Home start out? What inspired your interest in using 3D modeling to archive culturally specific objects, particularly the open source library that you're developing?
Yeah. So pretty much we kind of both collaborated and started Closest Home together as seniors at MICA, actually. We kind of took this course on Algebra Code, and it was kind of a course based on integrating like art and design, interactive arts, as well as coding, and kind of bringing all those elements together to consider like independent project works. So Grace and I, like, we'd been friends prior and kind of we're both agreed to kind of come together and think about what kind of project we could create. And both of us kind of making work based on like parts of our identity and like as well as our generational identities as well. Like we thought that'd be such an interesting thing to think about, kind of intimacy and bringing that within a project, I think. And so yeah, we kind of started Close as a Home that way. And then I think that in kind of thinking of digital art and like how we like to model a lot, we kind of created the Unity scene as like this collaborative space for learning about each other. And then kind of expanded it into reaching out to friends and kind of family. And we're like, oh, I think like a lot of people are really intrigued by this like kind of archiving of digital work and 3D modeling culturally specific objects. And I think that we recognize as well as two artists making work within this kind of realm and ideas, how difficult it was for us to find models in open source places that kind of reflected the kind of work that we were making. And I think we normalized that a lot before like getting really frustrated about like how much we had to model our own kind of work and like culturally specific things. So in making this project, it kind of expanded into developing this open source library, and that way we could like reach out to other people and like have them in their own like ideas and interests.
Yeah, I think Sam pretty much summed it up, so we could probably go to the next question.
Okay. I think the open source library is like really cool. It's a really cool idea, by the way. Like having everybody being a part of this big community. So question number 2, how did you each get started with 3D modeling?
Yeah, so essentially I didn't take like any 3D like modeling course or anything. I was a fiber major at MICA, and I was interested in like digital fabrication, so I learned 3D modeling through like Rhino, which is like very different from like Blender and Maya and even Cinema 4D. So I think I was interested in it and kind of learned through the process of like Closest at Home, but it was always something that I always wanted to learn. So it was like mostly just like learning online and just like learning as I was creating things I wanted to make. But in specific, my senior year thesis was kind of moved virtually after like COVID, and I wanted to create like a virtual clothing line, a fashion show online essentially. So I learned Clo 3D because of that situation as well. So that's like how I learned like other programs as well. It was out of need.
Yeah, I guess for me, I kind of similarly, like I actually graduated from the interdisciplinary sculpture department. So I think like both of our backgrounds are kind of like very different from like the work that we're necessarily doing now. Um, but I think that I started 3D modeling also like through learning digital fabrication methods and like using rhinoceros. And that was a program kind of more geared towards like through like making sculptural work and dimensional work like in the real world. So it was kind of programming like catered towards that. So a lot of it was like specific measurements and like really specific geometry and like precision. And then I started like kind of getting interested in expanding off of that modeling. And so then I started using other programs and started kind of making digital work more creatively, like through that. So yeah.
Okay, question number 3, kind of going back to question number 2 in the whole 3D modeling. Maybe you started off with harder stuff. What are some of the hardest objects to model in your experience?
I'll answer. I think for me, especially having learned Rhino first, that wasn't really made for like organic modeling, like, and that was something I was really interested in doing, like doing like a lot of plant life or like certain foods and stuff, a lot of organic material, like, and bringing that digitally. I think that was like some of the hardest things to model. And even now, using other programs, it's still like a really tedious process, like of modeling a lot of organic plant life and stuff. Because you want to make it as realistic as possible. And so I would say that. And then I also like tried modeling a hand once, which was like also pretty difficult. So I would say maybe those. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it would definitely be like just because like it's something we're like the most familiar with is like human bodies and also like I guess like life in general with it when it comes to like animals and like rigging those bodies to like make it look the movement as natural as possible. It's not something I'm like crazy experienced in, but it's like when I have done it, it is like kind of hard to like make it seem like closer to life as much as you can, which is like kind of like ideal when it comes to human bodies and like just life in general. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Putting something that's like natural in a not natural setting.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 4. What do you imagine Closest at Home to be in the next 2 to 5 years? Would you expand your collaborative practice or become involved into a 3D modeling studio?
I think we both kind of agreed, like, and talked about it that we definitely wanted to like continuously expand Closest Home. I don't think like when we first started the project, like we thought it would be what it is now even. But I think we recognize definitely in making this how many other, I think, BIPOC, like 3D artists are out there that kind of feel similar to us. So it'd be like really awesome, I think, to continuously expand and have more people, like, I don't know if that's like freelancers or what, kind of like also continuously working on like whatever projects or adding to the open source library and like just making like a network in that sense. But I think we're really open to also kind of, I guess, doing studio work and kind of doing hybrid of like a lot of like, I guess, like free, like kind of open source work, and then maybe doing other type of like projects with even like maybe BIPOC like owned like brands or companies or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I think something that we really were thinking of when we were making Closest at Home is like this idea of like accessibility that we like we're kind of really wanting within this like community. So that is something that we kind of want to forefront even if we become something larger or like more for profit, I guess. And if we were to work profit, it would be like really cool to work with like other brands or even other people and artists who are also like kind of have the same mission that aligns with us, which is kind of why we like started these skill shares as well, because we wanted to work with like other BIPOC artists who like maybe have these really cool ideas, but they don't necessarily like know how to 3D model or like create things that are virtual as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay. The last one's a long one, so bear with me. Tech and digital arts risk having, and in many cases, do have a pretty heavy Western bias. Along with what you do at Closes at Home, what kinds of actions, both industry and individual, do you think will help undo biases and prevent them from further developing in arts and tech?
So I guess like we kind of want to like forefront with this idea of like we feel like this Western bias is like kind of something that's just like integrated in every single industry, like no matter what, and something we really we're frustrated with by our fourth year in like a very like white art institution. We know this is a MICA event, but we thought it was like important to say it. But we were frustrated with like this like kind of elitism that is ingrained in the art and design world, in which is very like white is considered normal. So that was something we really noticed, especially when it came to like 3D models, and even like just like virtual spaces were very like non-specific or specific in the sense that was very Western. So even if you were trying to make like models, or even look for like a BIPOC, or even like a female person who does YouTube tutorials on like Blender or Cinema 4D, it's like really hard to find one. It's usually like white males, which isn't like a terrible thing. I think they have a lot to offer, but there's also like a different sense of like familiarity and like a lack of like I guess accessibility within that as well. So I think that's why we are kind of creating the space that would be mostly web-based, and something that is like very like not limited to a physical space or like an art gallery sense, or even like something that was based on empathy, because we found that was important, because we didn't want to like kind of connotate our work with like a lot of art talk or academic talk, I guess. So I think this beginning to like undo these biases for us starts with like kind of really working and like just like continuously working with this idea of empathy, and working with other BIPOC creators, and like trying to share the work that they're doing, because there's so many people who do create these things, but it's not necessarily shared as much. So we're trying to do that more on our social media with our monthly highlights, where we share like overall resources from reading lists to watch lists and like podcasts and music. And then we do more like specific ones. Like recently we did like lists of BIPOC creators, 3D creators that we personally admire, and then also like YouTube tutorials that are created by either femme people or BIPOC 3D YouTube tutorials or Twitch streamers. So yeah, that's what we're thinking of, I guess, as Closes at Home.
Yeah, I guess to like go off that, I think we also really stress like this necessity for collaboration, or this idea of like working with each other, because I think that's such a big step towards kind of combating this idea of like elitism and like individuality that exists, I think, in a lot of these art spaces. And I think that another way, like, we're also trying to share resources and all that, like Grace was saying, and like more than that, like it's also important, I think, to hold like institutions accountable, like you were saying, like and like how we can further bring resources, especially like from BIPOC, like to the forefront in conversation. And I think that, I don't know, I think that like, especially like after coming from school, like recognizing how difficult it was in itself to find resources in 3D libraries, but how much we also felt like we had to do a lot of outside research and look for our specific kind of narratives, in not only outside of this institution, online resources, and even in other spaces. It's like, how do we continue to, I guess, hold schools and like academic curriculums accountable for like the lack of representation within them?
We just got a question. I
Oh.
don't know if you saw it, kids.
Ooh.
Cool.
Let's see. I'll read it out. From Audrey, we have, let's see. I love your mission of accessibility, collaboration, and BIPOC representation. How do you feel about working within the art institution versus working outside of it?
I guess like I think it's definitely different, but right now it's like we just recently graduated at, I don't know if we mentioned, I think we did, but it's really different because like it's kind of like within your own terms, I guess. Like I feel like when I was like at least in school, even though like it wasn't like directly said, there were like kind of these like expectations that were like put onto me, like, or kind of slight pressures to make work within like my own identity at times too. Or even like when Sam and I were like pitching this idea of Closest at Home, there were like, as much as like they try to understand it, our like white teachers would never like fully understand the need for it. So now that we're working outside of that institution, it's like we don't necessarily like need approval to, or like have their like approval to like, or their critique in order to like continue with an idea. If we want to, we can like ask critique from our other like BIPOC friends, which is something we did in school too, but it's something that is more like within our own agency, I think, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think we agree that it's like we kind of are trying to step a little more away from that thought, like our institutions, because if we're recognizing there is like inherent Western bias within them, that's kind of, this project was kind of a reaction outside of that. So,
I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it does, but.
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Audrey.
Yes, thank you.
I think that might be it. I don't see any other one.
If there's any more questions, leave them now, or else we'll leave.
Really?
Well, if you want to hear more about Closest at Home, you can find a link to their website in the description of this YouTube video, as well as their email and their Instagram handle, which is @Closest at Home. Thank you for coming, everybody. I hope that was
Great.
informative. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that like we're gonna have this tutorial like posted on our YouTube too, so like people can rewatch it and like rewind and like actually maybe follow along in the future. So yeah, stay tuned for that, as well as Faith kind of sent us more images and context of the quilt and like what it represents in her family. So we'll be posting that on our Instagram as well. So we're trying to stay consistent with that. So just keep up with what we're posting and get more context for all of these tutorials and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
we might be doing another live soon.
Oh.
We don't know, but it's like maybe. But just follow us on Instagram. Keep track with us on Instagram just to see the updates.
Yes.
Do you know where people can find your YouTube channel? Is it just Closest at Home?
Yeah, you can probably just it's Closest at Home, or you can just click our link tree in our bio of our Instagram as well.
Of our Instagram, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.